March was a really good reading year for me, and so I wanted to share with you guys the 7 works that I read. That sounds like a lot, but some of them were super short, and also I just had more free time than usual, so that number isn't as big as it seems. Are you currently reading any books, and do you like it? I'm gonna go in reverse chronological order, so starting with the book that I finished last, and it's Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. Magic. Sandra seen a leprechaun, Eddie touched a troll. Laurie danced with witches once, Charlie found some goblin's gold. Donald heard a mermaid sing, Susie spied an elf. But all the magic I have known, I've had to make myself. I remember really liking this poet when I was a kid, and it wasn't just me, it was most people in my class. And I felt like a lot of the books that I read were a bit heavy, a bit dark, and I wanted to end the month with something very light. And this was perfect. I was kind of scared that maybe I've gotten too old for it, but surprisingly, the poems are so fun. And there were several times where I just started smiling because they were just so cute. Also, the art is beautiful. I really like the art style that the author uses. Poor Angus. Oh, what do you do, poor Angus, when hunger makes you cry? I fix myself an omelette, sir, of fluffy clouds and sky. Oh, what do you wear, poor Angus, when winds blow down the hills? I sew myself a warm cloak, sir, of hope and daffodils. Oh, who do you love, poor Angus, when Catherine's left the moor? Ah, then, sir, that's the only time I feel I'm really poor. The next book that I'll talk about is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. When you're the parent, no matter what the accident, no matter how far away you were at the time, and how seemingly powerless to avert it, a child's misfortune feels like your fault. You're all your kids have, and their own conviction that you will protect them is contagious. So in case you expect, Franklin, that I'm simply setting about one more time to deny culpability, to the contrary, broadly, it still feels like my fault, and broadly, it felt like my fault at the time. I've talked about this book a couple of times, but that's because it's one of my favorites. I think it's really well written, and this is actually my second time reading it. Essentially, it's written from the perspective of a mom whose son committed a school massacre. She's writing these letters to her estranged husband, Franklin, in an effort to understand why Kevin, her son, did what he did, and whether or not there was something in the way that she brought him up that led to him committing this awful crime. So a lot of the book deals with motherhood and nature versus nurture. And beyond that, it also deals with marriage and relationships and the ways in which they change or can change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. There was honestly so much about this book that I found very profound, and there were so many discussions that I felt like were very important. And the fact that the author took such a dark topic and was able to discuss it with such nuance, honestly, it left me in awe. The last chapter in this book, it left me with chills all over my body. And this is my second time reading it. I still felt so moved by the story and where it went. I will say that if you do pick up this book, it's a bit on the longer side. Also, some of the vocabulary used is a bit difficult, which makes sense when you contrast it with the main character, with the mother, because she comes off sometimes slightly pretentious. She was a very well-educated, rich woman in the United States, and she definitely writes like that. I don't think this book is for everyone, so I'm hesitant to recommend it to everyone, but I do think that it's a story worth reading. The next book was Nothing But the Rain by Naomi Selman. The truth is, there is no truth, only what we think we know. And this book is only 100 pages long. And so it's a very quick read if you're in the mood to get through something very quickly. And even though it's a novella, it's short, I felt like it was complete in its own right. There wasn't anything more that I wanted from the story, which I think is pretty impressive. Because when you have an unlimited amount of pages and the story just goes on and on, there's a higher chance that the story will feel more complete. But when an author can make something very brief and yet have it feel like it's a complete story, I believe that that's a true skill. Essentially, you follow this old retired woman who lives in this town where the rain causes you to lose memories. So the longer you stay out in the rain, the more contact you have with the water, the more memories that you lose. And so if you stay out long enough, you literally become like a body without a soul. And the main character, she's trying her best just to survive. For whatever reason, this is unknown to the reader, the townspeople are not able to escape this town. Something is trapping them inside. And a lot of the townspeople seek escape. But Laverne, the main character, is not one of those people. The book is written as a series of journal entries that she writes in the hopes of not losing her identity, essentially. The story is suspenseful, there's some mystery in there, and I quite like the main character. She was the right level of unlikable. I think what you would notice about the books that I like, a lot of the main characters are unlikable, and I especially like when it's a female main character that's unlikable. In this book, I could see how some people might not like Laverne, and then in We Need to Talk About Kevin, the mother was also not very likable, but I think because of that, it just added a layer of complexity. The next book that I'll be talking about was probably my least favorite. Actually, it was a short story, and it was by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It was White Nights.
You know, we thank some people for merely living at the same time as we do. I thank you for the fact that I met you, that I will remember you for all my life.
And I heard about this story through a friend, and basically, she had heard that it was a very good depiction of love. And essentially, the story follows this main character who's a dreamer, but he suffers from loneliness and he falls in love. The love is unrequited. That's essentially the story. And honestly, the story just fell very flat for me. First of all, the main character has a tendency to go on these very long monologues. And I'm not someone who doesn't like monologues. I do like them when they're used properly, but I felt like here they were just unnecessary. Also, the characters in the story just felt not real to me. And I am a very character-driven reader. And so when the characters don't feel real, it doesn't matter if the plot is good. I still can't enjoy the story as much as I would have if these characters felt real. And this is the second work that I read by Dostoevsky. I read The Karamazov Brothers, and I really, really liked that book. And it was because the characters felt so real to me. Like I was convinced that he was writing about real people. And that's exactly what I didn't like about this book. I felt like I was reading a book. Does that make sense? That's what I was doing. But I do like when books take me out of the story rather than being aware of the fact that at the end of the day, this is just a story. I do think that this is an unpopular opinion. I don't want this to deter anyone from picking it up because I did read some of the reviews and a lot of people connected with the story. And so I would keep that in mind. I think it's really cool when you could have such contrasting opinions about a story. Like some people can absolutely love it, and then some people can think it's a pile of crap. Like, I really like The Stranger, but at the same time, a lot of people have said that it's a very boring story. And I can understand that. I could see how it could be boring for some people. So that's what's cool about all of us being so different. The next book I read was a memoir, and it's I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy.
I've known for so long that my relationship with acting is a complicated one, not dissimilar to my relationship with food and my body. Both of them feel like constant pulling, yearning, begging, fighting. I'm trying desperately to get their approval, their affection, and I never quite seem to. I'm never quite good enough.
I don't think I really need to give this book that big of an introduction because it was everywhere for a while, but essentially you follow this former child actress, and she basically documents her relationship with her abusive mother. And the parts that I found most moving were the parts that talked about her eating disorder. I do think that it's a story worth reading because a lot of the times mothers are seen as the ultimate protector. They would do anything to save their child. And unfortunately, that's not the reality. Some parents are truly villains, and the things that they do to their children are honestly heartbreaking. The amount of strength it took to write something like this, I honestly can't imagine. And it was a story worth reading. I have no regrets picking this book up. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it because it was just so sad, but it did give me a lot to think about. The next book was one of my favorites from the month, and it's The Post Office Girl by Stefan Zweig.
Something had happened to her. She knew it herself. It was as though someone had sprinkled some venom into her eyes while she slept, so that now she saw the world in its light. Everything was ugly, malignant, and hostile when viewed with malignant and hostile eyes. She began every day in a rage.
Basically, this follows a time period after the World War where this girl is living in poverty. And she gets an opportunity to see how the other side, how rich people live. And once she's thrown back into poverty, she can't help but move through the world with rage because it's not fair that some people get to live like kings and queens and some people can't afford food. I loved the writing in this book. I thought it was beautiful, and the depictions of emotions was honestly so real. The story also was quite heartbreaking, but again, it was a story worth reading. And although this is in the past, I do think the ideas revolving how poverty has an effect on people are still true to this day. And so for that, I do think this was an important read. And it will definitely not be the last works by Stefan Zweig that I read. The next book that I want to read is Beware of Pity. The last book I read in March was All the Lovers in the Night by Miyako Kawakami. She's currently, I think, like my new favorite author.
In all those years of doing whatever I was told to do, I had convinced myself that I was doing something consequential, in order to make excuses for myself, as I was doing right now, and perpetually dismissed the fact that I'd done nothing with my life, glossing over it all. I was so scared of being hurt that I'd done nothing. I was so scared of failing, of being hurt, that I chose nothing. I did nothing.
And this follows, I believe she's a 34-year-old woman who basically stays locked up in her Tokyo apartment. And she's quite boring as an individual. There's nothing really that sets her apart from other people. But I think that's what I liked most about the story. When a story can juxtapose the mundanity of life with the complexity of our thoughts and problems, I think that's a good story. And I believe that this story did that well. If I were to tell you everything that happened in this story, I'm pretty sure most people would be like, this is a pretty boring book because not too much happens. But regardless of that fact, I think it was able to depict this very complex human being in a wonderful way. Thank you so much for watching this video, and please let me know what you're currently reading. I'm not sure if anyone could tell, but currently I'm very sick. And so if my voice comes off a bit weird or my thoughts aren't that articulated, that's why.